someone's listening now and saying, listen, I'm 25, I'm still studying, I'm trying to build my career. From a female perspective, are you looking at ovarian volume that they should go in? I mean, some of even my corporate executives are now doing, they're freezing their eggs. I mean, someone's listening and saying, okay, I might only have children when I'm over 30. What do I do right now from a female perspective? And then from a male perspective, do they go for a sperm analysis? Or what should people do if they're listening now?
Yeah. So for men who want to reproduce later, and of course, male fertility also declines with age, but it's at a much slower rate than female fertility. And so I think always doing a semen analysis early is going to be very helpful because it's going to really be able to support the understanding of what might I have to do in the future, right? So, and of course, in some instances where there might be a sperm reduction, then we start to look at why that might be the case. Some men these days, in particular, with endocrine disruptors being rampant in the environment, right? Some men are being affected in that way, and so menopausal effect in the
Mm.
andropause for men is actually a real issue. Which brings me to the fact that if we have testicular failure, then it might be that we have to also freeze some sperm. And it may also be very helpful, to be able to understand, okay, if I am 30 now and I have good quality sperm and I know that I want to father a child no matter what, freezing and banking sperm is actually a really cheap and very easy thing to do,
Mm.
right? And so that's something that I would highly recommend men who know that, okay, this is my future, this is what I want to do. They may not ever use it, right? They will kind of use it as almost as an insurance policy, but it's there if it's needed, right? Women, as always, for women, everything is so much more complicated, right? And so much more complex. But for women, what happens is that we're still not at the level of technology where you freeze eggs and you end up with a baby at the end of that process, right? So there is a possible chance, insurance policy style, of freezing some eggs and still being able to end up with, a baby. But the reason that this whole egg freezing thing started to begin with was for girls at puberty to be able to freeze eggs if they had to go through chemotherapy. By the time you get to 30, your egg quality is not what it used to be when you were a teenager, right? And so what happens is that even if you use vitrification for egg freezing, which is the best approach for egg freezing in 2024, you still end up with a situation of the cytoplasm, the watery part in the egg itself, before the nucleus, within the like outside the nucleus, it doesn't defrost very well. So what happens is that, let's say you are able to freeze 5 eggs, right, which is not very many. And typically, if you go through an entire IVF cycle to collect eggs, if you collect 10 eggs, that's going to be wow, that's amazing. Right. And of course, if you have PCOS, if you have, other conditions, and if you're hyperstimulated, which can cause death, and therefore we
Mm.
don't do that, right? We have a situation where you might have more eggs, but they might not all be mature enough to be able to actually be defrosted and end up in a
Mm.
pregnancy anyway. So more eggs doesn't necessarily mean more embryos
Yeah.
or, the possibility of more babies, although the lesser number of eggs that you have frozen for use at another time, the lesser chance you have. Let's say if you do have 10 eggs that are mature and, essentially a good quality and they were frozen at age 30, you might, upon defrosting those eggs to fertilize them, only end up with five, only end up with two. You don't know. And out of those, you don't know how many are actually going to fertilize with sperm, right? And so, one possibility and one alternative for women is freezing eggs. Obviously, the first alternative is having children at a younger age, which is not for everybody. Also, sometimes people haven't found their partner or they have, there's other constraints basically. But obviously trying to have children earlier is going to be the first thing. The second thing is freezing eggs. The third thing, which might be more effective in terms of how the outcomes, is actually freezing embryos. So if you are in a relationship that's stable and you think that you want to reproduce with this person, you go and you freeze embryos today for use at a later date. The cautionary tale here is that a relationship might be great today, but you may not be together in 10 years from now. And I've seen this happen many times in my clinic, where couples decide that, yes, everything is great today. We want to go, we want to freeze some embryos, and then they break up or they're no longer together. And then the woman has no more opportunity to have a child. She wants to use the embryos. The man refuses, and she cannot. The clinic will not release those embryos because those embryos are not only made by her. So that becomes a really challenging situation, right? And vice versa is also true. Like, you might end up with not being with a person and the previous partner wants to use the embryos. What happens then?
Sure.
So if you have agreements, like for example, as part of relationship agreements, people can actually elect to have these types of divorce agreements as well. And this is something to consider. If you think that, okay, things are great now and we want to do this, knowing that if we're not together, decide in advance what would happen,
Sure.
right? And that I think makes it at least clear to
Got you.
everybody going in how to do this. But
Mm.
yeah, I think those are some of the things that I think people need to consider because it's, just like IVF and all other assisted reproductive treatments are not a magic bullet, right? It's not a silver bullet. It's not just something that you're going to do it and
Mm.
absolutely is going to work. Freezing eggs and having that entire process go on is also not a silver bullet. I think that
Yeah.
that's an important consideration.